What if everything you believed about building wealth was wrong? What if the gap between the rich and the broke had nothing to do with education, nothing to do with talent, and almost nothing to do with how much money you earn? Here is a truth that most people never discover. Wealth is not a math problem. It is a behavior problem. And until you understand the psychology behind money, no salary raise, no investment tip, and no financial strategy will ever be enough to change your life. Some of the most brilliant minds in history have gone completely bankrupt, and some of the most ordinary people, janitors, teachers, postal workers, have quietly built fortunes that shocked the world after they were gone. So what separated them? It was not intelligence, it was not luck alone, it was the way they thought about money, the invisible beliefs, habits, and emotional patterns that guided every financial decision they ever made. Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money, tears apart the myth that managing money is about being smart. It is about being wise. And wisdom, unlike intelligence, is something every single person can develop. In this video, we are going to walk through the most powerful ideas from this book, starting with a truth that changes everything. A truth so simple it sounds almost too obvious, and yet almost nobody lives by it. The first big idea is this: no one is crazy. Read that again. No one is crazy. When you see someone blow their entire paycheck on things they cannot afford, when you watch a friend take out a loan to chase a risky investment, when you cannot understand why your coworker refuses to invest a single dollar despite having a comfortable income, it's easy to shake your head and label them as reckless or fearful or simply foolish. But Morgan Housel asks us to stop before we judge. Because every financial decision a person makes, no matter how strange it looks from the outside, makes complete sense when you understand the life that shaped it. Think about this. Your relationship with money did not begin when you opened your first bank account. It began in your childhood kitchen, listening to your parents argue about bills. It began in your teenage years, watching your neighborhood thrive or struggle. It began the first time you felt the fear of an empty wallet or the rush of an unexpected windfall. Those early experiences carved pathways into your mind, and those pathways whisper to you every single time you make a financial choice, whether you realize it or not. Someone who grew up during a period of economic crisis carries a deep, almost physical fear of losing money. They avoid the stock market, not because they are stupid, but because loss feels like survival to them. On the other hand, someone who grew up watching markets boom and technology create overnight millionaires feels almost invincible. They chase risk not because they are reckless, but because their story taught them that risk pays off. Neither of these people is wrong. Neither is crazy. They are simply products of their own unique financial history. Housel tells the story of two men whose lives make this point unforgettable. The first man was Ronald Read. Ronald Read spent his career as a janitor and a gas station attendant. He drove an old car. He wore a second-hand coat held together with safety pins. He clipped coupons and lived so quietly that almost nobody knew what he was doing behind the scenes. When Ronald Read died at the age of 92, he left behind an $8 million fortune, nearly all of it donated to his local library and hospital. The world was stunned. The second man was Richard Fuscone. Fuscone was a Harvard-educated executive at Merrill Lynch. He had an enormous income, a massive mansion, and all the financial education the world could offer, and yet he filed for bankruptcy. He had borrowed heavily to fund a lavish lifestyle, and when the market turned, everything collapsed around him. Same country, same economy, same opportunities, completely different outcomes. And the difference had almost nothing to do with knowledge or intelligence. It had everything to do with behavior. Housel understood something quietly but completely. Wealth is not what you earn. Wealth is what you keep. He never needed to impress anyone. He never compared his life to the man next door. He simply saved consistently, invested patiently, and let time do the heavy lifting. Fuscone, despite all his credentials, operated from a different set of beliefs, beliefs that rewarded performance, status, and the appearance of success, and those beliefs, not his intelligence, led to his downfall. This is the foundation of everything Housel is teaching us. Your financial outcomes are far more connected to your mindset than your income. Two people can earn the same salary and arrive at completely different financial destinations 20 years later, purely based on the stories they tell themselves about money. And here's the uncomfortable part. Most of us carry financial beliefs that were handed to us by our environment, not chosen by us. We inherited fear, or inherited recklessness, or the idea that money is something that happens to other people. We absorbed attitudes from our families, our communities, our early wins and early failures, without ever stopping to examine whether those beliefs are still true, or whether they are quietly working against us. Housel is not just asking us to feel empathy for others, though that is part of it. He's asking us to turn that same curiosity inward. What is your story? What moments shaped the way you see money today? Are those beliefs serving you, or are they holding you back without you even knowing it? Because the moment you start asking those questions, something powerful shifts. You stop being a passive product of your past and start becoming an active architect of your financial future. This is only the beginning. In the chapters ahead, we will explore luck, risk, the dangerous trap of never feeling like you have enough, and the extraordinary invisible force of compounding that separates the wealthy from everyone else. But it all starts here, with the simple, grounding, liberating truth that no one is crazy. We are all just working with the story we were given. And the good news is, stories can change.
Now, let us talk about something that most successful people are deeply uncomfortable admitting. Something that the world of finance, self-help, and hustle culture almost never wants to discuss openly. Luck. Not the fluffy, motivational poster kind of luck, the real kind. The kind that quietly determines the difference between a billionaire and a bankruptcy, between a legend and a footnote in history. Morgan Housel brings this to life with a story about two boys who went to the same school, ran in the same circles, and shared the same burning passion for computers at a time when almost no teenager in America had ever touched one. Their names were Bill Gates and Kent Evans. Both were exceptional. Both were destined for something extraordinary, but only one of them got the chance to find out what that was. Kent Evans died in a mountaineering accident before he ever finished high school. Bill Gates went on to build Microsoft and become one of the wealthiest human beings who ever lived. Same school, same era, same access to technology that almost no other student in the entire country had, and yet two completely different destinies, one shaped by an opportunity so rare it bordered on miraculous, the other ended by a tragedy nobody saw coming. Housel asks us to sit with that for a moment because it is deeply uncomfortable, and it should be. We are a culture obsessed with the story of the self-made man or woman. We love the narrative of someone who started from nothing, outworked everyone around them, made brilliant decisions, and climbed to the top through sheer force of will. And that story is not entirely wrong. Hard work matters, good decisions matter, character matters, but they are never the whole story. They are never operating in a vacuum. Behind every extraordinary success, if you look closely enough, you will find a moment of luck so perfectly timed that without it, the whole story collapses. Bill Gates himself has said it. He was one of the only students in the world with access to a computer terminal in the late 1960s. That single stroke of circumstance gave him thousands of hours of practice before most of his peers even knew what a computer was. Take that away, and the story changes completely. Not because Gates was not talented, he clearly was, but talent meeting the right opportunity at the right moment is a very different thing from talent alone.
And here's where Housel flips the coin over, because luck and risk are not opposites, they're twins. They move together. The same randomness that lifts one person up can drag another person down without a single warning. You can make every right decision, every careful, disciplined, intelligent choice, and still watch everything fall apart because of forces completely outside your control. A market crash, a health crisis, a global pandemic, a shift in the economy that nobody predicted. Risk does not check your resume before it shows up. It doesn't care how smart you are or how hard you worked. It just arrives. Think about the people who lost their savings in 2008. Many of them were not reckless. They were not gambling with money they could not afford to lose. They were following advice that had worked for decades. They were doing what everyone told them was safe. And then the floor disappeared. That's risk, invisible until the moment it is not. So what does this mean for the way we see success and failure in other people? It means we need to be far more careful about the stories we tell. When someone rises to the top, we are quick to study their habits, copy their strategies, and declare them geniuses. When someone falls, we are equally quick to find the flaws in their character, the mistakes in their judgment, the reasons they deserved what happened to them. But we are almost always working with incomplete information. We are seeing the outcome without seeing all the forces that shaped it. Housel makes a point here that cuts through a lot of the noise in financial media. Instead of obsessing over individual success stories and trying to reverse engineer what one person did, zoom out, look for patterns, ask what tends to work across thousands of people over long periods of time, not just what worked for one famously lucky individual in one specific moment in history. Because if you base your entire strategy on copying someone whose success was partly built on circumstances you cannot replicate, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Warren Buffett is the example Housel returns to again and again, and for good reason. Buffett is genuinely one of the greatest investors who ever lived. His knowledge, his discipline, his patience are all extraordinary. But there's something else about Buffett that almost nobody talks about. He's been investing consistently since he was a young teenager. He didn't stop at 60. He didn't cash out at 70. He kept going. And what that means is that the vast majority of his wealth, the overwhelming bulk of those hundreds of billions of dollars, did not come from being smart. It came from having more time than almost anyone else to let compounding do its work. Remove the decades. Keep everything else exactly the same. Keep the strategy, the intelligence, the discipline, but start him at 30 and retire him at 60 like a normal person, and Buffett's story becomes completely unremarkable. The genius without the time is just another good investor. The genius with the time becomes a legend. That's how powerful the invisible forces of luck, circumstance, and timing really are. But here's the most important thing to take from all of this. Understanding the role of luck and risk is not an invitation to become passive. It's not a reason to stop trying, stop planning, or stop building. It's actually the opposite. When you truly accept that some things are outside your control, you stop wasting energy trying to control them. You stop torturing yourself over outcomes that were never entirely yours to determine, and you redirect all of that energy towards the things you actually can influence: your savings rate, your spending habits, how long you stay invested, how you respond when things go wrong, your ability to stay calm when the market panics and everyone around you is making fear-based decisions. That's where your real power lives, not in predicting the unpredictable, not in outsmarting forces larger than yourself, but in building a financial life strong enough to survive the storms you cannot see coming, in keeping your behavior steady when the world around you is anything but. Housel also leaves us with something that goes beyond finance, a quiet call for compassion. When you see someone struggling financially, before you assume they simply didn't try hard enough or didn't make smart enough choices, consider the possibility that they were unlucky, that they worked just as hard as you, made decisions that were just as reasonable, and simply drew a shorter straw somewhere along the way. And when you find yourself succeeding, hold it with some humility. Acknowledge the effort, yes, but also acknowledge the tailwinds, the timing, the invisible hands that helped carry you forward. Because the honest truth is this: we are all far more vulnerable to chance than we like to admit, and we are all far more dependent on forces we never chose than our proudest moments would suggest. Knowing that doesn't make success less meaningful. It makes it more human, and it makes the way we treat each other in our financial lives, with grace, with patience, with genuine understanding, matter more than ever.
There is a question that almost nobody asks out loud, but almost everybody needs to answer. How much is enough? Not enough to survive, not enough to be comfortable, but enough. The point where you can genuinely stop, look at your life and say with complete honesty, I have what I need. I am good. Because here is the uncomfortable reality that Morgan Housel lays bare in this part of the book. Most people never reach that point. Not because they never accumulate enough, but because they never define enough in the first place. And without that definition, no amount of money will ever feel like it is enough. The goalpost will always move, the finish line will always retreat, and the chase will never, ever end. Housel opens with a story so simple it almost sounds like a joke, but carries the weight of a lifetime of wisdom inside it. The novelist Kurt Vonnegut and the author Joseph Heller were at a party together, hosted by an extraordinarily wealthy hedge fund manager. Vonnegut leaned over to Heller and pointed out that their host made more money in a single day than Heller had ever earned from his famous novel Catch-22 across his entire career. Heller smiled and said, "Yes, but I have something he will never have. Enough." That word, enough, said so quietly, so simply by a man who clearly understood something that billions of dollars apparently could not buy: contentment. Not complacency, not laziness, not giving up, but the deep, settled knowledge of what truly matters to you and the recognition that you already have it. That is one of the rarest and most powerful things a human being can possess. Now, look at the other side of that coin. Look at what happens when enough is never defined, when the appetite for more becomes its own kind of addiction. Housel points to Bernie Madoff, and this is where the story gets genuinely unsettling, because Madoff was not a desperate man. He was not someone clawing his way out of poverty or trying to keep the lights on. He was already extraordinarily wealthy. He had built a legitimate and highly respected financial business. He had prestige, influence, and connections that most people spend their entire careers dreaming about. He had, by almost any reasonable measure, more than enough. And yet, he built the largest and most devastating Ponzi scheme in the history of the financial world. He stole billions of dollars from thousands of people, many of whom lost their entire life savings. He destroyed families, ruined retirements, and shattered the trust of everyone who had ever believed in him. And when it all collapsed, when the lies could no longer hold their own weight, the man who already had everything lost everything. His money, his reputation, his freedom, his legacy. All of it gone. Why? Not because he needed more, but because he could not stop wanting more. Because the internal dial that is supposed to signal satisfaction, the one that says you have arrived, you can breathe now, was either broken or had never been set in the first place. And that is not just a story about a criminal. That is a story about a very human flaw that lives in all of us to varying degrees, the relentless, restless hunger for more that our culture feeds every single day. Think about how this shows up in ordinary life, not in Ponzi schemes or headline scandals, but in the quiet financial self-destruction that happens in living rooms and bank accounts all over the world. You work for years to reach a salary that once felt like a dream. You get there, and within 6 months, the lifestyle has expanded to match it, and somehow you still feel behind. You get a promotion, and instead of building security, you build a bigger life that costs just as much as your new income. The raise disappears into a nicer apartment, a newer car, more subscriptions, more expenses, and the financial breathing room you thought you would finally have never actually arrives. This is what economists call lifestyle inflation, and it is one of the most silent and effective wealth destroyers that exists. Not because spending money is wrong, but because when every increase in income is immediately absorbed by an increase in spending, you are running as fast as you can go and staying in exactly the same place. The treadmill gets faster, the exhaustion grows, but the destination never changes. Housel makes a distinction here that is worth burning into your memory, the difference between being rich and being wealthy. Rich is visible. Rich is the car in the driveway, the watch on the wrist, the house that impresses the neighbors. Rich is what you see when someone is performing their financial success for an audience. Wealth, on the other hand, is invisible. Wealth is the money that was not spent, the investments quietly growing in the background, the financial cushion that means a job loss is an inconvenience rather than a catastrophe. Wealth is options. Wealth is freedom. Wealth is the ability to say no to things that do not serve you and yes to things that do. And here's the painful irony. Many of the people who look the richest are actually the furthest from being wealthy. The guy driving the $100,000 car might be one missed payment away from losing it. The family in the enormous house might be drowning in a mortgage that owns them rather than the other way around. We see the performance of wealth everywhere, and we mistake it for the real thing. And then we spend our own money trying to replicate a performance that was never real to begin with. Social comparison is one of the most corrosive forces in personal finance, and in a world of social media where everyone's highlight reel is on permanent display, it has never been more dangerous. You are not just keeping up with the Joneses anymore. You are trying to keep up with a carefully curated, filtered, and often completely fabricated version of the Joneses that exists only on a screen. And every time you make a financial decision driven by what someone else appears to have, you are letting their story overwrite yours. You are funding an image instead of building a life. Housel does not tell us to stop being ambitious. Ambition is not the problem. The issue is ambition without direction, wanting more without ever asking more of what and more for what purpose. Because ambition pointed at a clear, personally meaningful target is one of the most powerful forces in human life. But ambition that is just a vague, endless hunger for more, driven by comparison and ego rather than values and purpose, will consume everything you build and leave you emptier than you started. There's a line in this chapter that deserves to be written somewhere. You will see it every day. There is no reason to risk what you have and need for what you do not have and do not need. Read that slowly. There is no reason to risk what you have and need for what you do not have and do not need. How many people have gambled away financial security, strained their marriages, damaged their health, and compromised their integrity chasing something they didn't even genuinely want just because someone else had it and it seemed like winning? Defining enough is not a resignation. It's not giving up on growth or settling for mediocrity. It is one of the most sophisticated, most intentional financial decisions you can ever make. It requires you to get brutally honest about what you actually value, not what you've been told to value, not what looks impressive to people whose opinions shouldn't matter, but what genuinely makes your life feel full and meaningful. Security, time, freedom, health, connection, adventure, whatever it is for you, name it, build toward it, and when you reach it, have the courage and the wisdom to recognize it. Because the person who can look at their life and say with genuine peace, "This is enough," is not someone who has given up. They are someone who has won in the deepest and most lasting way possible. They have escaped the trap that keeps most people running their entire lives and arriving at the end exhausted, wealthy on paper perhaps, but wondering what it was all for. Don't let that be your story. Decide what enough looks like, and then let that decision protect everything you build.
There is a force so quiet, so patient, so completely invisible in its early stages that most people dismiss it entirely before it ever gets the chance to change their lives. It does not make headlines, it does not go viral, it does not produce results you can show off at a dinner party after 6 months of effort. But given enough time, it builds empires. It turns ordinary people into extraordinarily wealthy ones, and it is available to absolutely everyone who has the discipline to leave it alone long enough to work. That force
is compounding. And if you do not yet understand it in your bones, not just in your head, but truly feel its implications, then this might be the most important thing you ever learn about money. Morgan Housel opens this chapter with Warren Buffett because Buffett is the single greatest living example of what compounding actually looks like when it is taken to its full conclusion. But Housel does not just celebrate Buffett's genius. He reframes the entire story in a way that most financial commentators completely miss. Yes, Buffett is an exceptional investor. Yes, his ability to analyze businesses, identify value, and maintain discipline through decades of market chaos is genuinely extraordinary. Nobody is taking that away from him. But here's what Housel wants you to understand. The reason Warren Buffett is worth hundreds of billions of dollars is not primarily because he's a great investor. It is because he's been a great investor since he was 10 years old and never stopped. Let that sink in for a moment. Buffett did not build his fortune in his 30s or 40s or even his 50s the way most people imagine success being built. He started at 10. He was serious about investing as a teenager. He was deeply skilled by the time most people are just figuring out how to manage a paycheck. And crucially, he never retired, never cashed out, never walked away and spent the rest of his life enjoying the fruits of his labor in the way most people plan to. He just kept going. Quietly, consistently, patiently, year after year after year. Housel runs a thought experiment that is genuinely staggering once you sit with it. Imagine Buffett had lived a more typical life. Imagine he started investing seriously at 30 instead of 10 and retired comfortably at 60, as most people do. Same intelligence, same strategy, same discipline, just a different timeline. In that scenario, by most estimates, his net worth would not be in the hundreds of billions. It would be somewhere around $11 or $12 million, which sounds like a lot until you compare it to what the actual timeline produced. The difference between 12 million and hundreds of billions is not smarter stock picks. It is not a better strategy. It is time. Decades and decades of uninterrupted time allowing compounding to do what compounding does when you leave it alone. This is the insight that changes everything if you truly absorb it. We spend enormous amounts of energy looking for better investments, smarter strategies, higher returns, the next big opportunity that will accelerate our wealth, and none of that is entirely wrong. But the most powerful variable in the entire equation, the one that dwarfs almost everything else, is simply how long you stay in the game, not how brilliantly you play it, how long you play it. The mathematics of compounding are almost offensive to our intuition because we are wired to think in straight lines. We expect progress to be steady and visible. We expect effort to produce proportional results. Work twice as hard, get twice as much. Invest for 10 years, get roughly twice what you would get in 5. But compounding does not work that way. It starts slowly, maddeningly, almost insultingly slowly. In the early years, it barely seems to be doing anything at all. You watch your account grow by small amounts and wonder if it's even worth it. You look at the numbers and feel vaguely disappointed. And this is exactly where most people give up, or switch strategies, or pull their money out to try something that feels more exciting and immediate. But here's what those people never get to see: the back half of the compounding curve, because compounding is not a straight line, it's an exponential curve. And exponential curves do something extraordinary. They appear almost flat for a long time, barely moving, barely growing, and then they bend upward almost violently. The same money that grew by a few $100s in the first year grows by hundreds of thousands in a later year. Not because anything changed, not because you did anything different, but simply because the base has grown large enough that the percentage gain translates into a massive absolute number. Housel uses a beautiful analogy to bring this home. He points to the history of the Earth and notes that the majority of the geological and biological complexity we see around us today was produced in a relatively recent fraction of the planet's total history, not because things suddenly started happening faster, but because complexity compounds on itself.
Each development created the conditions for the next one, and over an unimaginable span of time, the accumulation of small changes produced everything we see. Money works the same way. The early decades of investing feel like nothing is happening, and then, at some point, the accumulated base becomes so large that the returns on it begin to reshape the entire picture. Now here's the practical lesson that Housel draws from all of this, and it is perhaps the most counterintuitive idea in the entire book. Good investing is not about making brilliant decisions. It's about consistently not making terrible ones. Read that again because it sounds almost too simple to be true. The goal is not to find the investment that produces the highest possible return. The goal is to find a reasonable return that you can maintain without interruption for the longest possible period of time. Because a spectacular return that gets interrupted by panic, by poor timing, by switching strategies, by pulling out at the wrong moment, will almost always underperform a modest but uninterrupted return over a long enough timeline. This is why the investor who earns average returns but never panics, never chases trends, never pulls their money out when the market drops, will almost always end up wealthier than the investor who is constantly chasing the next big thing. Not because they were smarter, but because they stayed, because they resisted the very human urge to do something, anything, when patience felt impossible. Because they understood that interrupting compounding is not just a small setback, it's potentially the destruction of everything the waiting had been building toward. Think about it in terms of a forest fire. A single massive fire can destroy in days what took decades to grow. One catastrophic financial decision, one moment of panic that clears out an account, one desperate bet on a trend that seemed unstoppable can erase years of quiet compounding in an instant. The forest can grow back, but it starts from zero again. And starting from zero at 40 or 50 is a very different proposition than starting from zero at 20. Housel also expands the idea of compounding beyond money, and this is where the concept becomes truly life-changing rather than just financially useful. Because the same principles that govern investment returns govern almost everything that matters in a human life. Knowledge compounds. Every book you read builds on the last one. Every skill you develop opens doors to the next skill. Every year of experience in a field makes the next year more valuable, not because you're working harder, but because you have more to build on. Relationships compound. Trust built over years creates a depth of connection that no amount of charm or effort in a single conversation can replicate. Health compounds in both directions. Every good habit you maintain today makes the next good decision slightly easier. Every bad habit you allow to continue makes the next one harder to break. Reputation compounds. The consistency of your character over time builds something that cannot be manufactured or shortcutted. And like financial compounding, all of these things look painfully slow in the early stages, and then suddenly, almost without warning, produce results that seem impossible to anyone who hasn't been watching the whole time. So, what does all of this mean for where you are right now? It means that the single most powerful financial decision you can make today is not about which stock to buy or which fund to invest in. It is about starting. Starting now if you haven't already, or continuing steadily if you have. It means protecting your compounding from interruption by building the emotional resilience to stay calm when the market falls, when the news is terrifying, when everyone around you is making fear-based decisions that feel rational in the moment and catastrophic in the long run. It means understanding that the boring, undramatic, patient path is not the consolation prize for people who lack the intelligence to find a better way. It is the strategy. It is the actual method by which ordinary people build extraordinary financial lives. Not with genius, not with timing, not with secret knowledge, but with time, consistency, and the wisdom to leave something alone long enough to become something remarkable. The best time to start was yesterday. The second best time is right now.
Imagine you're sitting across from two people.
Both of them are telling you about their financial lives. The first person tells you they have a net worth of $5 million. They own a beautiful home in an upscale neighborhood, drive luxury cars, wear expensive clothes, and take lavish vacations twice a year. The second person lives in a modest house in an ordinary neighborhood. They drive a used car. They do not wear anything that signals money. They do not talk about what they own or what they earn, but quietly, invisibly, they have been saving and investing for decades. They have complete financial freedom. They could stop working tomorrow and live comfortably for the rest of their lives without changing a thing. Now ask yourself honestly, which of these two people is wealthy? Most people, if they're being truly honest, would instinctively point to the first person, because wealth in our culture has become almost entirely defined by what is visible, what you can see, touch, photograph, and post: the house, the car, the watch, the lifestyle. We have been trained since childhood to read financial success through these signals, and that training, Morgan Housel argues, is one of the most dangerous and expensive mistakes we can make. Because here is the truth that most people never fully confront. Spending money on visible things is, almost by definition, the opposite of building wealth. Every dollar that goes toward impressing someone else is a dollar that is not quietly compounding in the background. Every purchase made to signal success is a purchase that consumes the very resource that actually creates success. You cannot simultaneously perform wealth and build it. At some point, you have to choose which one matters more to you. Housel makes this point with a kind of blunt clarity that cuts right through the noise. He says that wealth is what you do not see. It is the cars not purchased, the diamonds not bought, the first-class upgrades declined, the restaurants skipped in favor of cooking at home. Wealth is the accumulated result of financial restraint exercised quietly over a long period of time. And because it is invisible, because it does not photograph well, because you cannot point to it at a dinner party, our culture almost entirely ignores it and instead celebrates its flashier, emptier cousin, the performance of being rich. Think about how deeply this confusion runs. When we see someone driving an expensive car, our brain automatically fills in a story. That person is successful. That person has made it. That person is wealthy. But Housel points out something that should stop us cold. The person most likely to be driving a $400,000 car is not a billionaire. It is someone with a $400,000 income and almost no savings. Because billionaires, the genuinely wealthy, the people who have accumulated enough that money has truly stopped being a constraint, rarely feel the need to signal their status through consumption. They have nothing to prove. Their security does not depend on your opinion of them. It is the people in the middle, the people who are earning well but not yet financially free, who are most vulnerable to the seduction of visible wealth. Because they have enough income to afford the signals of success, but not yet enough accumulated wealth to feel the security that would make those signals unnecessary. And so they spend, they upgrade, they perform, and in doing so, they consume exactly the resources that would have eventually given them the real thing. This is one of the great tragic ironies of financial life. The behaviors that make people look wealthy are often the exact behaviors that prevent them from becoming wealthy. And the behaviors that actually build wealth, the restraint, the patience, the quiet consistency, the willingness to drive the ordinary car and live in the modest house while your investments grow in the background, are behaviors that our culture does not celebrate, does not reward socially, and often actively mocks. Housel talks about saving, and he frames it in a way that is completely different from the usual financial advice you hear. Most conversations about saving focus on what you are saving for: retirement, a house, an emergency fund, a specific goal with a specific number attached to it. And those are all fine reasons to save, but Housel argues that the most powerful reason to save is to build options, to create the ability to say no. to give yourself the freedom to make choices based on what you actually want, rather than what your financial situation forces you to accept. Think about what that means in practical terms. When you have savings, a job loss is a difficult moment, but not a catastrophic one. You have time, you have breathing room, you can afford to wait for the right opportunity rather than desperately accepting whatever comes first. When you have savings, a health crisis does not automatically become a financial crisis on top of everything else. When you have savings, you can leave a situation that is wrong for you, whether that's a job, a relationship, or a living arrangement, without being trapped by financial necessity. Savings do not just build wealth, they build freedom. And freedom, the ability to control your own time and your own choices, is arguably the most valuable thing money can ever buy. Housel introduces here a concept that he calls the return on being reasonable versus being rational, and it's a distinction that matters enormously for how we think about financial decision-making. Rational means making the mathematically optimal decision in every situation. It means following the numbers wherever they lead, without sentiment, without emotion, without any consideration of how a decision feels. Reasonable means making a decision that is good enough financially and that you can actually live with, that you can maintain, that will not cause you to abandon your strategy the moment things get uncomfortable. And here's the key insight. A reasonable strategy that you can sustain is almost always better than a perfect strategy that you cannot. Because the perfect strategy only produces perfect results if you actually follow it. And most people, confronted with real fear, real uncertainty, real volatility, and real emotional pressure, will not follow a strategy that does not account for their humanity. They will break. They will deviate. They will make the fear-based decision that feels necessary in the moment and is destructive over time. This is why Housel argues that it is completely acceptable, even wise, to make financial decisions that are not mathematically optimal if those decisions help you stay calm and stay consistent. Keeping a slightly larger cash reserve than the numbers strictly require is not irrational if it means you sleep better at night and do not panic sell your investments during a downturn. Choosing a slightly more conservative investment allocation than your age technically demands is not a mistake if it means you actually hold your positions when the market falls instead of fleeing at the worst possible moment. The emotional sustainability of a financial strategy is part of its value, not a soft, irrelevant consideration to be overridden by pure logic, but a real and critical factor in whether that strategy will actually work for a real human being living a real life full of uncertainty and fear. Housel also explores the idea that financial decisions are almost never made in a vacuum. They are made by people who are tired, stressed, influenced by the news, comparing themselves to their neighbors, worried about their families, and carrying decades of emotional history around money. Pretending otherwise, pretending that any of us is purely rational when it comes to our finances, is not clarity, it is delusion. The wealthiest, most financially stable people are not the ones who somehow eliminated their emotions from their decision-making. They are the ones who built systems and strategies that work with their emotional reality rather than against it. So when you look at your own financial life, the question to ask is not just what is the mathematically optimal thing to do. Ask what is the best decision I can actually commit to, actually maintain, and actually follow through on when things get hard. Because the best plan in the world is worthless if you abandon it the first time it gets uncomfortable. And a simple, modest, slightly imperfect plan that you stick with through every storm, through every temptation, through every moment when doing nothing feels impossible, will build more wealth over a lifetime than 100 brilliant strategies that crumbled under pressure. Wealth is built quietly. It is built invisibly. It is built in the gap between what you could spend and what you actually spend. It is built by people who have stopped trying to look wealthy and started focusing on actually becoming it.
and it is protected by the humility to know that good enough, consistently maintained, almost always beats perfect, occasionally attempted.
Every journey toward financial wisdom eventually arrives at the same destination. Not a number in a bank account, not a retirement date on a calendar, not a house, a car, or a title. The destination is something far more personal and far more powerful than any of those things. It is the ability to wake up every morning and feel in complete control of how you spend your time. To do work you find meaningful because you choose to, not because you have no other option. To say yes to the things that matter and no to the things that do not, without fear driving either answer. That, Morgan Housel argues, is the highest form of wealth a human being can achieve. And everything else, every strategy, every habit, every principle in this entire book is ultimately in service of that one goal. We have traveled a long way through these ideas. We have learned that no one is crazy, that every financial decision makes sense when you understand the life behind it. We have confronted the uncomfortable truth that luck and risk are woven into every success and every failure, often more deeply than we want to admit. We have sat with the unsettling reality that without a clear definition of enough, no amount of accumulation will ever feel sufficient. We have marveled at the quiet, patient, almost magical power of compounding and understood that time in the game matters more than genius. We have pulled apart the dangerous illusion that looking wealthy and being wealthy are the same thing, and recognized that true wealth is invisible, built in silence, and measured not in possessions, but in freedom. Now we arrive at something that ties all of it together, something that Housel returns to throughout the book with increasing urgency. The idea that the most valuable thing money can purchase is not any object or experience, but control over your time. He calls it the highest dividend money pays, and once you understand it, it reframes every financial decision you will ever make. Think about your own life for a moment. Think about the moments that have felt most alive, most meaningful, most genuinely satisfying. Chances are most of them were not moments you purchased. They were moments you were present for. Time with people you love, work that felt purposeful, a morning with no obligations, a project pursued purely for the joy of it. These things do not require enormous wealth to access, but they do require time. And time, for most people, is the one resource that money has not yet freed. We trade time for money from the moment we enter the workforce. That is the basic transaction of economic life, and there is nothing inherently wrong with it. But Housel points out that the goal of the transaction is supposed to be to eventually reverse it, to accumulate enough money that you begin trading money for time instead. More freedom, more choice, more mornings that belong to you, more ability to direct your energy toward what you actually care about rather than what pays the bills. When money serves that purpose, when it genuinely expands your autonomy and your ability to live deliberately, it is fulfilling its highest possible function. But somewhere along the way, for millions of people, the transaction gets reversed in a different and darker direction. Instead of accumulating money in order to eventually buy back time, they accumulate lifestyle in order to maintain appearances. And maintaining appearances costs time. It costs the extra hours worked to fund the expensive house. It costs the career choices made for salary rather than meaning. It costs the years spent climbing a ladder toward a version of success that someone else defined. And at the end of all that spending and striving and performing, many people arrive at a kind of hollow exhaustion, materially comfortable, but deeply aware that something essential was traded away somewhere, and they cannot quite remember when. Housel is not prescribing a specific lifestyle. He's not telling you to live minimally, or to abandon ambition, or to stop caring about financial growth. What he is saying is far more fundamental. He is saying, be intentional. Know what you are building toward and why.
Make sure your financial life is shaped by your values, not by comparison, not by ego, not by a vague, culturally inherited definition of success that may have nothing to do with what actually makes you happy. He also addresses something that most financial books are too optimistic to discuss honestly: the role of failure and pessimism in a healthy financial life. Housel makes a distinction between being a long-term optimist and a short-term pessimist, and he argues that the best financial minds in the world tend to be both simultaneously. They believe deeply in the long-term upward trajectory of human progress, innovation, and economic growth. They trust that over decades things tend to get better, markets tend to recover, and patient investors tend to be rewarded. That optimism is what keeps them invested through the inevitable storms. But they also plan for the short term with a kind of clear-eyed pessimism. They assume things will go wrong. They assume there will be recessions, crashes, unexpected crises, periods of genuine fear and uncertainty. And rather than hoping those things will not happen, they build their financial lives to survive them. They maintain emergency funds not because they expect disaster, but because they cannot predict when disaster arrives. They avoid excessive debt, not because all debt is wrong, but because debt reduces your ability to endure difficulty without being forced into catastrophic decisions. They keep their lifestyle below their means, not because they are joyless, but because the gap between income and spending is the financial margin that makes survival possible when everything goes sideways. This combination, genuine optimism about the long run and genuine preparedness for the short run, is what Housel calls staying in the game. And staying in the game, as we have seen, is the single most important financial achievement available to any of us. Not the best returns, not the smartest picks, not the most sophisticated strategy, just staying. Remaining in the game long enough for time to work its compounding magic through every crash, every crisis, every moment when everything in you wants to run. There is something else Housel touches on near the end of the book that feels deeply important: the idea of room for error. He calls it the most underappreciated concept in personal finance. We build financial plans based on assumptions about returns, about income, about stability, about how the future will unfold. And those assumptions are always, without exception, incomplete, because the future doesn't care about our plans. It arrives with its own agenda, full of surprises that no model or spreadsheet ever anticipated. Room for error means deliberately building your financial life with more margin than you think you need, saving more than the minimum, carrying less debt than you technically could, keeping more cash than the pure math suggests is optimal, not because these things are mathematically perfect, but because they create a buffer between you and the inevitable moments when things do not go according to plan. They give you the ability to be wrong, to be unlucky, to be hit by something you never saw coming, and still survive. Still stay in the game, still give compounding the time it needs to do what it does. Housel ends with something that cuts deeper than strategy or tactics or any specific financial principle. He talks about the relationship between money and identity, about the way we allow our financial situation to define our sense of self-worth, the shame of debt, the anxiety of not earning enough, the pride that comes with wealth, and the fear of losing it. And he asks us to hold all of it a little more loosely, to recognize that financial outcomes are shaped by far more than character or effort alone, that good people struggle and flawed people prosper, that the story of your financial life is not a complete measure of your worth as a human being. This is not an invitation to avoid responsibility. It is an invitation to carry your financial life with more grace, to work hard and plan carefully and invest wisely and maintain your discipline, and also to forgive yourself when things don't go perfectly, to extend compassion to others whose financial struggles you do not fully understand, to hold your successes with humility and your failures without shame. Because at the end of everything, money is a tool, one of the most powerful and complex tools human beings have ever created, but still a tool. It is not the point. The point is the life you build with it, the freedom you create, the time you recover, the people you are able to show up for, the work that matters to you, the mornings you own completely. Build toward those things, protect them, choose them over and over again, even when the culture tells you to choose something more impressive. That's the psychology of money fully understood, not as a set of rules or strategies, but as a way of seeing, a way of making every financial decision from the deepest and most honest part of yourself, rather than from fear, ego, or comparison. Know what enough looks like. Respect the power of time. Build invisibly. Stay in the game. And let the life you are quietly constructing be its own kind of wealth. One that no market crash, no recession, and no bad year